Have you ever been judged before you even had the chance to speak? Imagine sitting quietly in your seat, ticket in hand, dignity intact, only to be told you don't belong. What would you do if someone in uniform, someone entrusted with safety and service, suddenly struck you across the face? This isn't just a story about a slap. It's about a choice between silence and strength, between humiliation and hope. What if it happened to you, in front of hundreds of strangers, with cameras rolling? Would you shrink under the weight of prejudice, or would you rise and show the world who you truly are? Naomi Carter, a young black CEO, faced that exact moment. What unfolded next didn't just change one career, it shook an entire industry. And it might just change the way you look at justice, dignity, and power. Stay with us as we journey through this unforgettable story. And before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard by everyone. The hum of engines filled the cabin as passengers boarded Atlas Airlines Flight AA 4821 bound from Houston to Washington, D.C. It was a late afternoon flight, the kind of trip where most travelers just wanted to sit down, exhale, and let the hours pass until they reached their destination. In seat Danoué, right by the window of the first-class cabin, sat Naomi Carter, dressed in a simple cream blazer and dark jeans. She didn't look flashy. There was no entourage, no expensive jewelry that screamed status, just a leather carry-on tucked neatly at her feet, a tablet in her lap, and an air of quiet composure. For Naomi, flying wasn't unusual. As the CEO of Skybridge Innovations, a fast-growing tech company in aviation logistics, she spent almost half her month in the air. But today's flight was important. She was headed to D.C. for a high-stakes board meeting with government and industry leaders, one that could decide the future of her company. As the last of the passengers filtered into first class, Heather Collins, the senior flight attendant on duty, strode down the aisle with the kind of briskness that suggested authority. Heather had worked with Atlas Airlines for nearly a decade. She prided herself on knowing her passengers, but what she saw in seat 2A unsettled her. Heather stopped abruptly, towering over Naomi. "Excuse me, ma'am," Heather said, her tone sharp, carrying across the quiet cabin. "This section is for first-class passengers only." Naomi looked up slowly, her dark eyes steady and calm. She held out her boarding pass with a polite smile. "I am in the right seat," she said softly. "Here's my ticket." Heather took the pass with 2 fingers as though it were contaminated. She squinted at it, then let out a dry laugh. "Nice try," she sneered. "But I've seen this before. Fake boarding passes. People trying to sneak their way up front." Her voice rose a notch louder, enough for nearby passengers to turn their heads. Naomi's jaw tightened, but she remained composed. "My seat is 2A, she replied, "purchased directly through the airline site." Heather's lips curled into a smirk. She flipped the boarding pass onto Naomi's lap. "Don't lie to me. I know who belongs up here." The words hung in the air like smoke. The implication was clear. Naomi's skin, her quiet presence, her very existence in this seat. Heather didn't believe she belonged. A man across the aisle, a middle-aged businessman, shifted uncomfortably. A woman 2 rows back whispered to her husband, but no one moved. Heather leaned closer, her voice dripping with disdain. "Save yourself the embarrassment and head to coach. Honey, people will thank you for not wasting everyone's time." Naomi inhaled slowly, steadying herself. She had been here before, in different forms, dismissed, underestimated, treated like she didn't deserve to stand where she stood. But the weight of this moment pressed harder. I suggest you verify my ticket properly before making accusations, Naomi said, her tone firm but calm. Heather's face reddened. Don't tell me how to do my job. And then, without warning, Heather's hand whipped across Naomi's face. The sound cracked through the cabin like a gunshot. Gasps erupted. A child in row 3 whimpered. The businessman dropped his coffee in shock. Naomi's head snapped to the side, her cheek burning, skin already blossoming red where the strike had landed. But she did not rise. She did not scream. She sat still, one hand resting lightly on the armrest, the other on her lap. Her breathing was measured, her gaze focused straight ahead. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Every eye in first class was on them. Passengers froze, caught between disbelief and fear. Heather straightened her uniform, as if nothing had happened. She pulled out her phone, raised it high, and began to live stream. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced loudly to her invisible audience, "we've got ourselves a fraud right here, trying to steal a first-class seat and getting aggressive when called out." The phone camera lingered on Naomi's composed face, the faint mark of the slap visible. Naomi blinked slowly, but said nothing. It wasn't just humiliation. It was assault. It was discrimination, raw and unfiltered, playing out at 30,000 feet. For Naomi, this wasn't just another insult to absorb and move past. Something inside her shifted. This was no longer about her alone. It was about what this moment represented for every person who had been told they didn't belong, for every traveler made to feel small. She placed her tablet on the tray table, folded her hands neatly on top, and lifted her chin. The cabin didn't know it yet. Heather certainly didn't know it. But what had just begun would soon spiral into an avalanche, one that would reach the very top of the airline industry and shake its foundations. And it had all started with a single slap. The sting on Naomi's cheek lingered, but it wasn't the pain that held her still. It was the silence, a silence that pressed down on every passenger in the cabin like sudden turbulence. No one moved. No one spoke. Phones hovered uncertainly in hands, recording but trembling. Some passengers stared at the floor, others at Heather, who stood with her phone held high, narrating her version of events to an invisible crowd online. Naomi sat perfectly upright, hands folded on her lap, her breathing steady. The heat radiating from her cheek felt like fire, but inside she forced herself to remain composed. She had learned long ago that the calmest person in the room often held the most power. She thought of her grandmother, who used to tell her when she was a child, "Naomi, dignity is your armor. No one can strip it from you unless you hand it over." And so she refused to hand it over. Heather's voice cut through the stillness. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said to her phone, "this woman tried to sneak into first class. She got violent when I called her out. We can't let people just get away with things like this." A murmur spread through the cabin. Violent. The passengers who had just seen the slap exchanged uneasy glances. In seat 2C, a man named Robert Hayes, a veteran with salt and pepper hair and the rigid posture of someone who had spent decades in uniform, clenched his jaw. He had seen injustice before on foreign soil, in heated battlefields, but watching it unfold here, on a civilian flight, twisted something deep in his gut. "Excuse me." Robert's voice boomed suddenly. "That's not what happened." The words jolted the cabin. Heads turned toward him. Heather froze, her phone still pointed at Naomi. "I watched you," Robert continued. "You slapped this woman. She never laid a hand on you. She was calm. You were not." Heather's face tightened. "Sir, Please return to your seat. I'm handling this." "No," Robert said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of years. "You assaulted her, and now you're lying to everyone on that camera. I won't sit quietly while you do it." Gasps and whispers rippled across the rows. A few more passengers began holding up their phones, recording not just Naomi, but also Heather, her reddening face, her unsteady grip on her live stream. In seat 3A, Emily Watson, a middle school teacher who had spent her career dealing with conflicts between students, took out her notebook and pen. She had learned that when chaos erupted, documentation mattered. She began writing, recording the time, the words spoken, the actions she had seen. Her heart pounded, but her hand was steady. And then, in seat 4B, Jordan Lee, a college senior studying communications, tapped the screen of his phone to start a live stream. His followers were used to his campus updates, not dramatic events 30,000 feet above the ground, but within seconds, dozens, then hundreds of viewers flooded into his live chat. "Yo, I'm on Atlas Airlines right now," Jordan whispered into the camera. "Something crazy is going down. A flight attendant just slapped a passenger. Look at this." He angled his phone discreetly, capturing Naomi's composed profile, the red mark on her cheek, Robert's upright stance, Emily's frantic note-taking. The comments poured in disbelief, outrage, demands for justice. Naomi could feel the eyes of the cabin pressing into her, the weight of both silence and murmurs building like static before a storm. She wanted to say something, but she also knew timing mattered. Words, if spoken too soon, could vanish like smoke. Heather, sensing her control slipping, raised her chin defiantly. "All of you need to mind your own business," she snapped. "I know what I saw. I know who belongs up here. She doesn't." The word struck harder than the slap. "She doesn't belong." Naomi closed her eyes briefly, letting the pain of those words wash over her. They were the kind of words she had heard in boardrooms, whispered in hallways, written between the lines of polite rejection emails, words designed to reduce her, to suggest she was an intruder in spaces she had worked twice as hard to reach. But when she opened her eyes, she was no longer just a woman with a stinging cheek. She was a mirror, reflecting an ugly truth that every passenger was now forced to confront. She reached slowly into her bag, pulled out her phone, and looked at the screen. Notifications exploded: texts, emails, missed calls, her assistant, her legal team, board members, even her communications director, all lighting up her screen as if they somehow already knew something was wrong. Naomi didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, she set the phone face down on her tray table, a quiet gesture of control. "Ma'am," she finally said to Heather, her voice steady, quiet, but impossible to ignore. "Physical assault is a federal crime on an aircraft. I suggest you consider carefully what you've just done." The silence deepened again. This time, however, it wasn't stunned passivity. It was a silence charged with awareness. Passengers shifted, eyes sharp, cameras steady. Heather's expression faltered, just for a moment, before she snapped her composure back in place. She pressed her headset. "Security to Gate 12, she said coldly. "I have a disruptive passenger in first class refusing to return to her assigned seat." Naomi sat still, her voice low but clear. "I am in my assigned seat. You've made a mistake, and now the world is watching you double down on it." Her words were not a shout, not a plea, but a statement of fact. Calm, certain, final. Robert crossed his arms, nodding. Emily raised her hand like she was in a classroom. "I'm recording this too," she announced, "for evidence." Jordan's live stream chat exploded with messages. "We see it. She's innocent. This is discrimination." Heather's phone showed her own live stream counter climbing into the hundreds. But instead of supportive comments, the feed was filled with disbelief and anger. "You hit her. We saw it. End the stream before you ruin yourself." The tide was turning, and Heather could feel it. But Naomi, still in her seat, her blazer smooth, her posture unshaken, knew this was only the beginning. The silence had broken. Voices were rising. And soon, the weight of truth would be impossible to contain. What Heather thought was a moment of authority had just become a stage. And Naomi, without lifting a hand, had begun to reclaim it. The tension in the cabin was so thick it felt as though the very air had grown heavy. Every creak of the overhead bins, every shuffle of a shoe against the carpeted floor seemed amplified in the silence that followed Heather's call for security. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Some shifted in their seats, as though debating whether to speak or remain hidden in silence. Many had learned the habit of keeping their heads down, not wanting to become entangled in confrontation. But this moment was different. The injustice had been witnessed by too many eyes, and the weight of it could no longer be swallowed quietly. Robert Hayes, the veteran in 2C, was the first to truly break that barrier. His voice had already pierced the quiet once, but now he stood halfway in the aisle, shoulders squared, his eyes steady on Heather. "I served this country for 30 years, Robert said, his voice firm but not shouting, the kind of voice trained to carry without aggression. "I fought in places where justice felt like a dream, but right here, on this flight, I know exactly what I saw. You struck her. Don't you dare twist the truth." Heather's lips pressed into a tight line. She adjusted her uniform, trying to maintain authority, but the flush spreading across her cheeks betrayed her. She opened her mouth, but Robert continued before she could interrupt. "This isn't about a seat," he said. "This is about respect, and you just shattered it." The cabin buzzed faintly, passengers murmuring, nodding. The dam of silence had cracked. From 3 rows back, Emily Watson raised her voice. She was not used to speaking loudly in public, but years of managing restless classrooms had given her the skill to command attention when she needed to. "I'm a teacher," Emily said, lifting her notebook. "I wrote down everything as it happened." She showed her ticket. She stayed calm. "And then you hit her." Her voice trembled slightly, but her conviction held. "That's the truth." Heather spun toward her, incredulous. "You're really going to take her side?" "I'm going to take the side of the truth," Emily replied firmly. Passengers leaned closer, whispering to one another. A man in 5A shook his head, muttering under his breath. A young mother in 3C hugged her daughter closer, whispering reassurance that everything would be okay. The child peeked over her mother's arm, wide-eyed, sensing the gravity of the moment even without understanding the words. Meanwhile, Jordan Lee's live stream was catching fire. What had started with a few dozen viewers had surged past 1,000 in less than 5 minutes. His phone buzzed with comments scrolling so fast they blurred. "This is insane. She's so calm. I can't believe that attendant hit her." "We're watching history happen right now," Jordan whispered into the camera, his voice urgent but controlled. "Everyone, keep sharing this. The world needs to see what's going on up here. This isn't right." Naomi remained silent through it all, her hands still folded on her lap, her chin tilted slightly upward. Inside, her mind was a storm. Should she speak now? Should she reveal who she was? The instinct to defend herself tugged at her, but so did the knowledge that timing mattered. She had seen battles lost not because the truth wasn't on the right side, but because it was spoken too soon, drowned out by noise and denial. She thought of the boardroom in Dallas last year, when investors had doubted her ability to lead Skybridge innovations. They had questioned her, doubted her credentials, scrutinized every detail of her life. But when she finally spoke, when she revealed her vision with clarity and evidence, they had no choice but to listen. That memory steadied her now. Let them speak first, she thought. Let their voices join together. Then the truth will not be mine alone, to carry. Heather, flustered, turned back to Naomi. Her voice was sharp, almost desperate. Get up. Right now. You don't belong here. Naomi looked up at her slowly, her gaze unblinking. I am in my assigned seat, she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. And I will not move. The calmness in Naomi's tone seemed to rattle Heather more than any shouting could have. The attendant's hand trembled slightly as she clutched her phone, her livestream audience swelling but turning hostile. The comments pouring in were no longer supportive. They were condemning. We saw it. You slapped her. Stop lying. This is going viral. Heather's jaw tightened. She had not expected this moment to spiral beyond her control. Robert stepped closer, his voice low but firm. You've crossed a line you can't erase. You think this is about her seat? No. This is about your prejudice. And you're not going to get away with it. Not this time. Passengers nodded. A ripple of agreement moved through the rows. Naomi felt the shift in the air. It was subtle, but it was there. The weight was no longer pressing down solely on her. It was shared now, carried by witnesses who refused to stay quiet. Still, she knew this was just the beginning. The confrontation had broken open, but the real battle, one that stretched far beyond this cabin, was only starting to take shape. The engines roared softly beneath them, a reminder that they were thousands of feet above the earth, trapped together in this sealed metal capsule where truth and lies clashed openly. Naomi's hand brushed the smooth surface of her tablet on the tray table. Her reflection stared back at her from the black screen. Strong yet weary, she whispered to herself, almost inaudible, "Stay steady. The moment will come." Heather shifted uncomfortably, glancing around at the sea of recording phones, the eyes locked on her. Authority was slipping through her fingers like sand. But still, she clung to her role, pressing her headset again, demanding backup, refusing to admit fault. The first voices had risen. The silence was broken, and the cabin, once divided by fear, was beginning to unify under something stronger truth. Naomi knew what was coming. The storm was gathering, and she was ready to stand in its center. The announcement from Heather's headset echoed through the cabin. Security to Gate 12. I have a disruptive passenger in first class. The words felt like a trigger. A ripple of unease spread across the rows. People stiffened in their seats, clutching armrests, glancing nervously toward the aisle. The hum of the engines filled the silence, but beneath it throbbed the pulse of tension. Naomi sat still in seat 2A, her hands folded, her breathing even. She could feel every eye on her, but her composure held. Years of facing doubt, of being underestimated in boardrooms, had trained her for moments when the weight of perception pressed hardest. She would not break here. 2 uniformed airline security officers entered the cabin, their presence heavy with authority. Their boots thudded against the carpet as they walked toward the front, scanning faces. One of them, a tall man with a square jaw, spoke with rehearsed calm. Which passenger is causing the disruption? He asked. Heather pointed swiftly at Naomi. Seat 2A, she said. She refused to move after being told she doesn't belong here. She's confrontational, aggressive. I had to defend myself. Gas rose. Several passengers shook their heads. Disbelief etched across their faces. Phones lifted higher, recording every second. Robert Hayes stood before the officers could approach Naomi. His voice carried weight, deep and unwavering. That's not true. I saw it. She was calm. She showed her ticket. The only aggression came from that flight attendant. He jabbed a finger toward Heather. Emily raised her notebook, her hand trembling, but her voice strong. I wrote it down as it happened. She was assaulted. That's the truth. Jordan's livestream was buzzing with comments so fast he could barely keep up. Thousands were watching now. This is insane. Protect her. We're witnessing history. The officers glanced between Heather and Naomi. The taller one shifted uneasily. Ma'am, he said, addressing Naomi, we need to confirm your seat. Naomi nodded calmly. She reached for her ticket, slid it across the tray table, and held it steady in her hand for him to take. The officer examined it, his brows furrowing. It says 2A, he murmured. Exactly, Robert said. She belongs here. Heather's face flushed. She snapped. Tickets can be faked. She doesn't look like someone who belongs in first class. The officer's eyes flickered at the words. Something in his posture shifted, a recognition that the line had been crossed. Naomi's voice was soft, but it cut through the air like steel. You just said it aloud. Not about rules, not about safety, about belonging. She met the officer's eyes, steady and unwavering. Do you see the truth now? The cabin buzzed louder, a chorus of passengers murmuring, some even nodding in agreement. The second officer, a woman with dark hair pulled into a bun, cleared her throat. Ma'am, we can't remove a passenger with a valid ticket, especially not when there are multiple witnesses. She turned slightly toward Heather. We need to verify your account. Heather's hand shook as she gripped her phone, the live stream still rolling. Her own audience had turned against her, comments flooding in. We saw the slap. You're lying. This is on camera forever. Her authority, once unquestioned, was slipping like sand through her fingers. Naomi inhaled slowly, her heart steady. Inside, she could feel her anger pulsing, but she pressed it down. Outrage would serve no purpose here. Calm would, truth would. Robert looked around the cabin. We all saw it. Anyone who watched knows what happened. This woman deserves to be treated with dignity. A murmur of agreement rose. Emily lifted her notebook higher, as if it were a shield of truth. Jordan whispered urgently into his live stream. This is bigger than just a seat now. This is about justice. The taller officer turned back to Naomi. Ma'am, would you like to press charges? The cabin inhaled collectively, the question hanging heavy. Naomi tilted her head slightly, considering. The weight of decision pressed on her chest. She thought of her grandmother's words. She thought of every time she had walked into a meeting where her presence was doubted. She thought of the mark still burning faintly on her cheek. I will make my decision, Naomi said softly. After this flight, right now, I will remain in my seat, where I belong. Her words carried power precisely because they were spoken without anger. Calm, certain, a declaration of belonging that could not be denied. Heather sputtered. You can't just. But the officer raised a hand, silencing her. Enough. This matter will be documented. Until then, Everyone stays seated. Ma'am, he added, turning to Naomi with a nod of respect. Thank you for your patience. Naomi inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the officer's words. She felt the shift, subtle but undeniable. The authority in the cabin was no longer Heather's. The passengers settled back into their seats. Though the tension remained thick, whispers rippled. Phones continued recording. Jordan's livestream comments exploded. She's incredible. So calm. This is going viral worldwide. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in slowly. She knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of something far larger. The strike had been the spark, but what would come next would test not only Heather, not only Atlas Airlines, but an entire system built on unspoken biases. She whispered to herself, words only she could hear. Stay steady. The storm hasn't even begun. The cabin remained tense even after the officers stepped back. The hum of the engine seemed louder, filling the uneasy silence like a drumbeat in the background. Heather Collins still stood in the aisle, her shoulders squared, though her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her phone. Her livestream counter continued climbing, but the comments pouring in were anything but supportive. Naomi Carter sat in her seat, posture straight, eyes calm. She touched the faint mark on her cheek gently, not out of weakness, but as a quiet reminder of what had just happened. She refused to let shame claim her. Instead, she let the fire of determination settle deeper within. Robert Hayes leaned slightly into the aisle. Ma'am, he said to Naomi with respect, don't let her silence you. I've seen people try to bury the truth before. It never works. You've got a plane full of witnesses ready to stand with you. Emily Watson lifted her notebook higher. I wrote down every word. She added, I'll sign it, if needed. She's not alone. Jordan Lee's voice came from just behind them, half whisper, half declaration to his phone. This isn't just a flight anymore. The world's watching. 10,000 live viewers right now. His hand shook with adrenaline, but his resolve didn't falter. Heather's face hardened. Viewers don't change the fact that she doesn't belong in this seat. Her voice cracked slightly, but she raised it louder to mask the quiver. I've been flying for 10 years. I know the type who tries to sneak into places where they don't belong. The words struck the cabin like a blade. Naomi's chest tightened, not from surprise, but from recognition. She had heard these words before, different voices, different contexts, but always the same weight. You don't belong. For a moment, memories surged. Her first investor meeting, where an older executive had told her she should aim lower because women like you don't lead billion-dollar companies. The time she walked into a luxury boutique and was shadowed by staff as though she were a thief. The countless times people assumed she was an assistant rather than the founder. She had carried those moments in silence, choosing her battles carefully. But today, the silence had cracked. And through that crack, truth was beginning to surface. Naomi reached calmly into her bag and pulled out a sleek leather folder. She opened it slowly, deliberately, as though revealing something sacred. Inside was a crisp business card, embossed with the logo of Skybridge Innovations. She placed it gently on the tray table in front of her, the silver letters catching the cabin light. My name is Naomi Carter, she said, her voice steady but resonant enough for all to hear. I am the CEO of Skybridge Innovations. We are one of Atlas Airlines' largest technology partners. My company designs the navigation systems on this very aircraft. Gas erupted around the cabin. Whispers spread like wildfire. Passengers leaned into the aisle to get a glimpse of the card, of Naomi herself. as though seeing her for the first time. Heather blinked, her mouth opening and closing. She tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. "Anyone can print a business card," she scoffed. "That doesn't mean anything." Naomi didn't flinch. She picked up her phone, unlocked it, and with a few taps, projected an email onto the tablet on her tray table. The logo of Atlas Airlines glowed on the screen. The subject line clear, confidential, meeting with Dot and F.A. The email bore her name, her title, her direct involvement in a partnership worth hundreds of millions. Jordan swung his camera to capture the screen. His livestream chat exploded. "She's the CEO. She literally runs the tech on that plane. This flight attendant is done." Robert exhaled a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "Well, I'll be damned. She's not only in her rightful seat, she's half responsible for keeping this bird in the sky." Emily scribbled furiously in her notebook, circling Naomi's name, underlining it twice. Heather's face drained of color. Still, she clung desperately to denial. "You think flashing a screen changes anything. I know what I saw. She doesn't belong here. She can't belong here." The last sentence slipped out, raw and unguarded, and the cabin seemed to recoil from it. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, the ugliness of the words too clear to ignore. Naomi leaned back, her hands resting lightly on the tray. Her eyes met Heather's, not with rage, but with something deeper, resolve, tempered by years of endurance. "This isn't about a seat anymore," Naomi said quietly. "It's about the lie you told the moment you struck me. The lie that people like me don't belong in places we've earned. That lie ends here." The silence that followed was not heavy like before. It was sharp, cutting, filled with a recognition that the air itself had shifted. The passengers were no longer neutral observers. They were witnesses. They were participants in a truth too undeniable to be ignored. The female security officer stepped forward, her voice firm. "She's telling the truth. We can verify her credentials immediately." She pulled out her device, tapping quickly. Within moments, Naomi's profile appeared, credentials intact, her role with Skybridge Innovations confirmed. Heather staggered back a step, her phone still raised but her hand trembling. The comments on her live stream were brutal now. "You're finished? We're watching your career collapse live. How could you lie like this?" Naomi sat still, her posture graceful, her presence commanding without a single raised voice. She had not needed to shout. She had not needed to strike back. The truth itself had begun to surface, and it carried more weight than any blow. Robert broke the silence with a low chuckle. "I think we all know who doesn't belong here, and it isn't her." Laughter, nervous but genuine, rippled through the cabin. Even the tension seemed to loosen, replaced by a current of justice finally breaking through. Heather's face hardened once more, but the cracks in her authority were now too wide to patch. She had wanted to humiliate Naomi, to erase her dignity with a single act of violence. Instead, she had exposed her own prejudice to a cabin full of witnesses and to a world watching live. Naomi folded her hands once more, whispering softly under her breath, words that steadied her heart. "This is just the beginning." Outside the cabin windows, the runway shimmered beneath the morning sun. But inside Flight AA 4821, the real turbulence was not in the air. It was online. Jordan Lee kept his phone angled discreetly, capturing Naomi Carter's quiet composure, Heather Collins' crumbling confidence, and the flurry of reactions spreading across the cabin. His livestream chat was a Floodheart's angry faces, hashtags forming in real time. "Holy crap," Jordan whispered into his mic. We just witnessed the CEO of Skybridge Innovations reveal herself, and this crew member is still doubling down. Chat, look at the numbers. 25,000 people watching. It's going viral as we speak. Emily Watson leaned over, her voice low but urgent. They're not just watching. They're documenting. Every single comment is a record of how this played out. The magnitude began to dawn on everyone. What had started as a slap in a confined cabin had now become a public trial. Every word, every expression, every detail was being captured and broadcast across thousands of screens. Heather glanced at her phone, her lips parting as she saw the comments scroll past too fast to read. Fire her now. Racist and violent. We're tagging the FAA, Atlas Airlines, CNN. She quickly fumbled to shut the stream down, but it was too late. Screen recordings had already spread. The internet had its teeth in the story, and it wasn't letting go. Robert Hayes chuckled under his breath. Lady, you went fishing for attention. Now the whole world's watching you drown. Heather snapped back. You don't understand how these things work. People forget. They move on. But Naomi, still calm, shook her head. Her voice carried not anger, but a quiet certainty. No, they don't forget. Not anymore. The internet doesn't erase prejudice. It archives it. Her words lingered like a verdict. Across the aisle, a young woman with earbuds pulled them out. It's trending, she announced. Justice for Naomi is the #2 tag in the U. Already. Jordan's phone buzzed with notifications. His stream had jumped to 45,000 live viewers. The chat was now filled with lawyers, activists, journalists, even airline employees chiming in. One message stood out. This isn't just viral. This is evidence. The gravity pressed into Naomi's chest. She had faced boardrooms filled with doubters, critics who thought she was too young, too female, too black to lead a tech empire. But this moment was different. This wasn't about contracts or negotiations. This was about dignity hers, and by extension, everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Heather, still clinging to a shred of authority, straightened her shoulders. The internet doesn't change airline policy. I know what my job is, and my job is to decide who belongs up here. Naomi's jaw tightened. She took a long, steady breath. No, Heather, she said softly, your job is to serve every passenger with dignity, and you failed. The words didn't rise above conversation level, but the silence they created was louder than any shout. Even the officers paused, sensing that something deeper than authority was unfolding. Emily broke the silence. Naomi, what happens next? If this is already out there, if it's already viral, what do you want the world to know? Naomi turned her gaze toward the cabin, then back to Jordan's phone. Fully aware thousands were watching, she spoke not just to the passengers, but to every unseen viewer beyond the plane walls. I want the world to know this isn't just about me. I can defend myself. I have power, money, and a platform. But what about the people who don't? What about the mother traveling with kids who can't fight back? The young student flying alone? The elderly man who's too tired to argue? This isn't just my story, it's theirs too. And it's time we all stop pretending. It doesn't happen. Her voice trembled only once, then steadied again. The chat exploded with messages. Preach. She's speaking for all of us. Protect her. Heather shifted uncomfortably. The more Naomi spoke, the more her own authority evaporated. The more the passengers leaned toward Naomi, the more isolated she felt. The male officer, Jackson, finally spoke. Ms. Carter, I believe this will need formal investigation. But I also believe he hesitated, glanced at Heather, then back at Naomi. I believe you've been wronged here, and it's not my place to ignore that. Naomi nodded respectfully. Thank you. All I ask is fairness. The rest will take care of itself. But the rest was already far beyond this cabin. By now, journalists were tweeting screenshots, civil rights attorneys were offering pro bono services, a congresswoman had posted, "Watching this unfold with horror, accountability must come." The story had escaped the plane, flown faster than any aircraft could. Robert leaned back, whistling softly. "Ma'am, I think you just lit a fire under the whole country." Naomi exhaled, her fingers interlaced tightly in her lap. Inside, her heart pounded with conflicting emotions, anger. Yes, but also a deep ache. The weight of memories of every injustice she had swallowed quietly before. She thought of her grandfather, who had worked double shifts in Houston's sweltering refineries so she could go to college. She thought of her mother, who used to whisper, "Keep your head high. Naomi, the world will try to bend you." And now here she was, bent but not broken, and the world was watching. Heather muttered something under her breath, too low to catch, but the look in her eyes gave her away fear, the realization that her career was no longer hers to control. The pilot's voice finally came over the intercom, steady but edged with tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Williams. We're experiencing an unexpected delay due to a situation in the cabin. Please remain seated. We'll be updating shortly." Passengers exchanged glances. Everyone knew what that meant. The airline was scrambling. Naomi leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. She let the noise of the cabin fade, and in that stillness, she found clarity. This wasn't just her battle anymore. It had become something larger, something she couldn't ignore. When she opened her eyes, she caught sight of Jordan's phone again. The viewer count had crossed 70,000. The comments raced too fast to read. But the sentiment was clear. The tide of public opinion had shifted, and Naomi knew the truth was out. There was no putting it back. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "This storm will change everything." The tension inside the cabin had shifted from outrage to anticipation. Everyone sensed the next move would decide the course of the entire incident. Naomi Carter sat quietly, her palms resting on her knees, her mind steady though her pulse thundered in her ears. She had endured humiliation, violence, and denial, but she had also revealed the truth. And now the weight of justice hovered just above them, waiting to fall. The cockpit door clicked open. Out stepped Captain Thomas Grant, tall, silver-haired, his uniform immaculate despite the strain on his face. 30 years in aviation had taught him how to face turbulence at 30,000 feet. But today's storm wasn't outside, it was here, among his passengers. The moment the captain appeared, the cabin fell into a hush. Passengers straightened, whispering stilled. Even Heather Collins, who had seemed so defiant minutes earlier, shifted uneasily. Authority had entered the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Grant began, his voice deep, deliberate. "I've been briefed on the situation. I need to address it directly." He turned first to Naomi, his expression somber. The red mark on her cheek caught the light, a brutal reminder of what had happened. His jaw tightened. "Miss Carter," he said, inclining his head respectfully, "on behalf of Atlas Airlines, I want to apologize for what you've endured on this flight. No passenger, no human being should ever face assault or discrimination in our care." The passengers murmured in agreement. Robert Hayes nodded firmly. Emily Watson scribbled in her notebook, and Jordan Lee swung his camera closer, whispering to his viewers. The captain just apologized directly to Naomi. "This is huge." Heather stepped forward quickly. "Captain, you don't have the full story." "This woman enough." Captain Grant interrupted, his tone sharp but controlled. The single word carried the weight of authority honed over decades. "I've heard enough, Ms. Collins, and I've seen enough." Heather froze, her face blanching. For the first time, her confidence faltered completely. The captain turned back to Naomi. "I understand you are the CEO of Skybridge Innovations." Naomi nodded, her voice calm. "Yes, and my company supplies your airline with key navigation systems, including the one guiding this very aircraft." The words struck like lightning. Gas echoed through the cabin. Passengers turned to each other, whispering fiercely. The captain's expression shifted shock, then realization, then something deeper, fear. He understood instantly what this meant. This wasn't just a passenger. This was a partner, a shareholder in the very safety of his airline. "God help us," he murmured, almost too low to hear. Naomi didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she let the silence emphasize the truth. Then, softly but firmly, she said, "Captain, what happened here today isn't just about me. It's about your airline, about whether Atlas truly protects its passengers." Her words hung in the air like a judgment. Jordan's live stream was now at 90,000 viewers. The chat surged with comments. "The captain knows he's in trouble." "Naomi just flipped the entire power dynamic." "Atlas Airlines can't survive this without action." Captain Grant adjusted his cap, visibly shaken but determined to regain control. He turned to Heather. "Ms. Collins, you are relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. Hand over your device. Now." Heather's eyes widened. "Captain, please." "I was just now," he repeated, his voice brooking no argument. Slowly, reluctantly, Heather handed her phone to the female officer, who powered it down immediately. Her hands trembled as she realized the live stream, the weapon she had wielded so recklessly, was now evidence against her. Passengers exhaled audibly. Some clapped softly, unable to contain their relief. Naomi watched quietly, her heart steady. She knew this was just one step. The deeper reckoning was still to come. Captain Grant faced the passengers. "You've all witnessed an incident that should never have taken place. I assure you, this matter will be dealt with at the highest levels. Ms. Carter, if you are willing, I would like to contact our corporate leadership immediately to begin resolving this." Naomi's gaze was unwavering. "Captain, I will cooperate. But you should understand this isn't just a matter of customer service. This is a matter of justice, and the world is already watching." The captain swallowed hard, nodding. "I understand." He gestured to the officers. "Escort Ms. Collins to the rear of the aircraft. Keep her seated until we land." Heather's face was pale, her lips pressed tight. She wanted to argue, but the weight of authority in the eyes of nearly 200 passengers pinned her in silence. She walked down the aisle, head bowed, her career unraveling with each reluctant step. As she disappeared into the rear of the plane, Naomi closed her eyes briefly. A part of her, deeply human, felt a flicker of pity. She knew what it was like to be underestimated, dismissed. But Heather's actions had crossed a line: violence, prejudice, humiliation. Pity could not erase accountability. Emily leaned forward, her voice soft. "Naomi, how are you holding up?" Naomi gave a faint smile. "Stronger than I expected, but also tired. Tired of fighting the same battles in different rooms." She paused, her throat tightening. But I won't let silence win. Not this time. Robert placed a steady hand on his armrest. Ma'am, with all due respect, you've got more courage in your little finger than most men I served with overseas. Don't doubt for a second that you've already made a difference. Naomi met his eyes, gratitude softening her expression. She knew his words came from a place of honor, of lived sacrifice. The captain cleared his throat. Ms. Carter, I'd like to put you in direct contact with Atlas leadership while we're still on the ground. They need to hear from you directly. Naomi nodded. I'll speak to them, but not just for myself, for every passenger who's ever been treated as less. The captain studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. Understood. As he returned to the cockpit, the murmurs of passengers swelled again. Jordan updated his viewers, his voice almost reverent. You guys saw that. The captain himself just acknowledged Naomi's power, and Heather's been removed. This is history unfolding in real time, Emily whispered to Naomi. Do you realize what you just did? You didn't just defend yourself. You opened a door for change. Naomi inhaled deeply, letting the words settle. She thought again of her mother's voice, telling her to keep her head high. She thought of the countless times she'd chosen silence, just to get through another day. And she knew silence was no longer an option. The storm was far from over, but for the first time, she felt the wind shifting in her favor. She turned slightly toward Jordan's phone, her voice calm but resolute. This is bigger than me. This is about justice for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. And justice is coming. The cabin erupted in quiet applause, not just for Naomi, but for what she represented: resilience, dignity, and a demand for change. The engines hummed quietly as Flight AA 4821 still sat idle on the tarmac. Passengers fidgeted, some whispering, some glued to their phones, while others simply stared at Naomi Carter as though she were a lighthouse cutting through stormy seas. She remained calm, almost too calm, but inside, her thoughts moved like quicksilver. She had been in crises before: corporate negotiations that threatened billions, government hearings where every word could tip markets. But this was different. This was raw, personal, and it had unfolded in public, before witnesses, and before the endless eye of the internet. Captain Thomas Grant reappeared, his phone in hand, his voice measured but uneasy. Ms. Carter, he said quietly, I've contacted Atlas Airlines corporate office. They're in a state of panic. Naomi's lips curved faintly, though not with amusement. I imagine they would be. By now. This isn't just a flight incident. It's a national story. Jordan Lee lifted his phone, whispering to his viewers. Guys, we just hit 150,000 live viewers. CNN, Reuters, Aviation Daily. They're all in the chat. This isn't just viral. This is historic. Heather Collins sat silently in the back of the cabin, her face pale. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. The weight of inevitability pressed heavy on her shoulders. She had wanted attention, and now she had it, but not the kind she could survive. The captain cleared his throat. Corporate wants to speak with you directly, Missy Carter. Their words, not mine, were damage control, cannot wait until landing. Naomi inclined her head. Then let's not keep them waiting. The male officer handed her the captain's phone, and Naomi placed it gently against her ear. The cabin hushed again. The passengers weren't just bystanders anymore. They were participants, witnesses to a moment of reckoning. A clipped voice came through the line. Ms. Carter, this is David Reynolds, Interim COO of Atlas Airlines. I want to extend our deepest apologies for the incident. We are prepared to make amends. Naomi's voice was steady, even gentle. Mr. Reynolds, amends are not made through words whispered in crisis. They're made through change that endures after the cameras stop rolling. The passengers leaned in, sensing history in her tone. Reynolds stammered slightly. We understand. Please, let's discuss privately once you land. Naomi's gaze flicked to Jordan's phone. The chat scrolled wildly, hearts and fire emojis flashing across the screen. She spoke firmly into the line. No, this will not be handled in the shadows. The public has seen what happened, and the public deserves to see how Atlas responds. A pause, then a reluctant, understood. The line clicked, and Naomi returned the phone to the captain. Emily Watson whispered, her eyes shining. You just forced them into accountability. Right here, in front of all of us. Naomi exhaled slowly. Not forced, invited. The real question is whether they'll accept. Then, another vibration, this time Naomi's own phone buzzing in her lap. The screen lit with 3 words that tightened the air around her FAA executive office. She pressed accept, putting the call on speaker for all to hear. Ms. Carter, this is Patricia Morrison, Deputy Administrator of the FAA. We've received live reports of an incident involving discrimination and physical assault aboard Flight AA 4821. Are you safe? Naomi's voice was calm. Yes. Deputy Administrator, I'm safe. But the truth is, safety isn't just about metal and engines. It's about dignity, too, and that failed today. The cabin stirred, passengers nodding, some whispering yes under their breath. Morrison's tone sharpened. This incident triggers mandatory investigation under Title 49. We will be reviewing Atlas Airlines certification for compliance, effective immediately. This flight is under federal scrutiny. Captain Grant, you are to preserve all evidence and cooperate fully. The captain stiffened, his face ashen. Understood, ma'am. The call ended, leaving the cabin stunned. Robert Hayes let out a low whistle. Federal investigation? On the spot. I've seen a lot, but I've never seen something move this fast. Jordan's viewers poured in comments. The FAA is watching live. This airline is toast. Naomi just triggered a government probe mid-flight. Naomi's hands folded calmly in her lap, but inside, her heart tugged between 2 poles. She wanted justice, yes, but she also knew the gravity of what this meant. Thousands of jobs, contracts, and families could feel the ripple of Atlas's downfall. Could she carry that weight? Her mind whispered with doubt. Am I unleashing something too big? Will they call me ruthless? But then she remembered Heather's slap the sting, the shame, the denial, and the faces of passengers of color she had seen through the years, quiet and compliant under unfair treatment. If not me, then who? She straightened her back. Resolve returned. Another notification buzzed across Jordan's screen, a tweet from a sitting senator. Watching the situation unfold, discrimination in aviation cannot stand. Accountability must be swift and real. The weight was no longer Naomi's alone. It had become political, national, unstoppable. Heather muttered bitterly from the back, her voice shaking. All this, over a seat. Naomi turned her head slightly, her gaze sharp but her tone soft. No, all this over your belief that I didn't belong. That's the real seat we're fighting for. Her words settled into the cabin like scripture, each passenger feeling the truth ripple through them. Emily wiped a tear discreetly. Robert sat taller. Even Captain Grant looked at Naomi with something close to awe. The storm had fully broken, But Naomi knew storms could either destroy or cleanse, which it would be that depended on what came next. The cabin of Flight AA 4821 felt less like a passenger jet and more like a courtroom suspended above the earth. Every eye watched Naomi Carter, every phone pointed, every whisper recorded. The hum of the engines blended with the tapping of messages sent across the world. Naomi's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text or an alert. It was a direct call from Atlas Airlines headquarters. The name on the screen made her pulse quicken. Thomas Grant Sr., the Airline CEO. Captain Grant blinked when he saw it. "That's my boss," he muttered, almost in disbelief. "They're moving faster than I've ever seen." Naomi accepted the call and placed it on speaker, her calm voice announcing, "This is Naomi Carter." A commanding but weary voice filled the cabin. "Miss Carter, this is Thomas Grant. I've been informed of what's happening aboard my airline. And let me say this first. I am deeply sorry. What you've endured is unacceptable." Passengers glanced at each other. Some mouths fell open. The CEO of Atlas Airlines himself, apologizing live in front of them. Jordan Lee whispered to his stream, "Oh my God. You guys. The CEO himself just joined. This is beyond anything I imagined." The viewership counter climbed past 200,000. Naomi didn't rush her reply. She let the silence stretch just long enough to assert control. Then, steady and clear, she said, "Mr. Grant, an apology doesn't undo what happened. A member of your crew struck me." Then she tried to erase the truth by painting me as someone who didn't belong. That is more than a mistake. It's a symptom of something broken. Thomas Grant's sigh crackled through the line. I know, and we will act. Whatever it takes." Naomi's gaze swept the cabin. Passengers leaned forward, expectant, as if she were their spokesperson now. She realized she wasn't negotiating only for herself. She was negotiating for every silent witness of discrimination. "Then listen carefully," Naomi said, her voice even but firm. "This isn't just about compensation. It isn't about saving face. It's about change, real change." A pause. Then Grant replied, cautious, "What are you asking for?" Naomi inhaled, steadying herself. 3 things. First, immediate removal of Heather Collins from her position. Not a suspension, not a transfer. She struck a passenger and lied about it on camera. She cannot represent your airline again. Heather, sitting at the back of the plane, let out a sharp gasp. Her face flushed crimson, but she didn't speak. The weight of the demand crushed the last fragments of her defiance. Grant hesitated. "That can be arranged." "Second," Naomi continued, her tone unyielding, "Atlas must commit to mandatory anti-bias and dignity training for every crew member. Not a memo, not a box-checking exercise. Real training. With accountability," Robert Hayes muttered. About time, under his breath, loud enough for nearby passengers to nod in agreement. Grant's voice returned. "That's ambitious. It will cost Naomi cut him off. It will cost less than a federal investigation that strips your airline of certification. Less than the lawsuits already lining up in my inbox. Less than the loss of trust spreading across social media this very second." The silence on the line spoke louder than any protest. Naomi pressed on. "Third, Atlas must establish a public passenger bill of rights that guarantees every traveler, regardless of race, gender, or status, will be treated with dignity, and it must be enforceable. Not words on a poster. Enforceable." The cabin erupted in murmurs. Emily Watson's eyes brimmed with tears. "She's not just protecting herself," she whispered. She's protecting all of us. Jordan's stream lit up Naomi for president. This is leadership. She's rewriting airline history mid-flight. Grant's voice finally returned. Lower. Weighted. You're asking for systemic reform. Miss Carter, you realize you're pushing us to change an entire industry in one phone call. Naomi's gaze dropped to her folded hands. Inside, doubt stirred. Was she asking too much? Was she pushing too far? The thought of thousands of employees' livelihoods hanging in the balance flickered through her mind. Her grandmother's voice whispered back to her memory. Dignity is your armor. Don't hand it over. Naomi lifted her chin. Yes, Mr. Grant. That's exactly what I'm asking. Because if this doesn't change now, it never will. And you know the world won't let you walk away quietly. The cabin held its breath. Heather closed her eyes in the back. Realizing her downfall was no longer a possibility, it was guaranteed. Finally, Thomas Grant exhaled, long and heavy. You've left me with no choice. I will agree to all three conditions. Heather Collins' employment is terminated effective immediately. A training initiative will be drafted before this day ends, and I will personally announce a passenger Bill of Rights within the week. Passengers gasped. A few clapped, tentative at first, then stronger. Robert Hayes pounded his armrest approvingly. Emily dabbed her eyes. Jordan's chat exploded. She won. History. Atlas bows to Naomi. Naomi's chest tightened. Not with triumph, but with gravity. She had asked, and he had agreed. But she knew promises could wither unless the world demanded follow-through. Mr. Key. Grant, Naomi said softly. The world is listening. Keep your word. Because if you don't, I promise you I won't stay silent. Grant's voice, strained but resolute, replied, You have my word. The line clicked dead. Naomi lowered the phone, resting it on the tray. A strange quiet filled the cabin. Not tension, not relief, but reverence. They had all witnessed something far bigger than a dispute in first class. They had seen a system bend, if only for a moment, under the weight of truth. Emily whispered, Naomi, you just changed everything. Naomi's eyes softened. Not everything, but maybe enough to start. She leaned back in her seat, the engines finally rumbling as the plane prepared for takeoff. Outside, the sky stretched wide and open. Inside, the storm had not ended, it had only moved forward, carrying with it the weight of justice and the fragile hope of change. The plane finally left the ground, lifting into the pale blue sky. But inside, the cabin still felt like a crucible. Conversations hushed and rose, phones buzzed with constant notifications, and Naomi Carter sat quietly, her eyes on the clouds outside the window. She had just negotiated with the CEO of Atlas Airlines in midair. The passengers around her had witnessed it. The internet had recorded it, and the world had already started to react. Yet Naomi knew the true test was still ahead. The flight was short, just under 3 hours from Houston to Washington, but every minute stretched long. Robert Hayes dozed lightly, his arms folded, though his jaw twitched as if still bracing for confrontation. Emily Watson kept writing in her notebook, page after page, the pen scratching like a drumbeat. Jordan Lee updated his viewers every 15 minutes, whispering, It's still climbing. 280,000 live. This is history. Heather Collins sat restrained at the back of the cabin, her career unraveling in silence. The other flight attendants avoided her, focusing on passengers with stiff professionalism, their eyes darting occasionally toward Naomi. Respectful, awed, uneasy. When the captain's voice finally broke the air again, tension flickered. Ladies and gentlemen, We are beginning our descent into Washington National. Please remain seated with your belts fastened. Upon landing, law enforcement will board the aircraft. Thank you for your cooperation." The words sank into every passenger. The moment was near. Naomi inhaled deeply, her heart steady. She thought of her grandmother, her mother, her own younger self who had once flown in coach, clutching textbooks, ignored and underestimated. "This moment is not just mine," she reminded herself. "It belongs to every person who has ever been told they didn't belong." The wheels screeched softly against the runway, the plane jolting as it slowed. Passengers craned their necks, peering through the windows. The terminal loomed close, but what drew their eyes was the flashing red and blue beyond. Police cruisers, airport security, media vans with satellite dishes already raised. Jordan whispered into his phone. "This is insane. There's a whole crowd out there. Reporters, cameras, protesters. They knew she was coming." Emily clutched her notebook tighter. "Naomi, are you ready for this?" Naomi gave a faint smile. "I've been ready my whole life." The plane rolled to a stop. The chime dinged, but no one stood. The captain's voice came again. "Please remain seated. Authorities will board shortly." The door opened. 2 uniformed federal marshals stepped inside, followed by local police. The air grew thick, charged with expectation. One marshal, broad-shouldered and calm, spoke clearly. "Heather Collins, you are being placed under investigation for assault and misconduct aboard a federal aircraft. Please stand." Gasps rippled. Heather's face drained of color. "This is a mistake," she whispered hoarsely. But her legs trembled as she stood, escorted firmly down the aisle. Phones recorded every step, every flash of her pale face, every twitch of her hands. As Heather disappeared through the door, the cabin seemed to exhale. Justice, at least its first step, had been served. Then the marshal turned to Naomi. His voice softened. "Ms. Carter, we have officers prepared to escort you through the terminal. There's a large media presence outside." Naomi rose slowly, smoothing her blazer. The passengers around her began to clap, hesitant at first, then swelling into a steady rhythm. Some stood. Robert Hayes saluted her silently. Emily whispered, "Go show them what strength looks like." Jordan, still streaming, whispered to his phone, "She's walking into history." Naomi stepped into the aisle. Every eye followed her. Every phone lifted. She walked with measured grace, her heels clicking softly against the carpet. The door opened. Heat, noise, and light rushed in. The terminal was a storm. Cameras flashed like lightning. Microphones thrust forward like reaching hands. Voices shouted questions. Overlapping, urgent. "Ms. Carter, how do you respond to Atlas Airlines' apology? Do you intend to sue? What message do you have for passengers of color everywhere? Naomi, are you safe? Are you angry? Are you afraid?" Naomi stopped at the threshold. For a heartbeat, she let the noise wash over her. Then, lifting her chin, she stepped fully into the crowd. The flashbulbs lit her face. Her voice rose, steady and resonant, carrying through the chaos. "I am Naomi Carter. I was assaulted on Atlas Airlines Flight AA 4821 because a crew member believed I didn't belong. But this isn't just my story. It's the story of countless travelers who face prejudice in silence. Today, that silence ends." The crowd roared. Cameras surged. Passengers from the flight shouted their support. "We saw it." "She's telling the truth," Robert's voice boomed above them. "She never raised a hand." She stayed calm the whole time. Emily lifted her notebook, waving it as evidence. Jordan's livestream chat shot past 500,000 viewers. Naomi's words didn't falter. Atlas Airlines has agreed to systemic reform, real, enforceable reform. But promises are not enough. We must all hold them accountable. Not just for me, for every passenger who has ever been told, "You don't belong." Because the truth is, we all belong. Applause erupted. Some wept openly. Protesters outside the barricade cheered, holding signs that read "Justice in the sky" and "Dignity for all travelers." Naomi felt the heat of lights on her skin, the crush of voices, the endless flashes. Yet inside, she felt a surprising peace. She had carried her dignity through humiliation, through violence, through lies. And now, standing here, she carried more than her own story. She carried a movement. One reporter shouted above the noise, "Ms. Carter, what happens next?" Naomi paused. Her eyes scanned the crowd, the marshals, the passengers who stood behind her, the strangers watching across the world through glowing screens. "What happens next," she said softly but firmly, "is up to all of us. Justice doesn't end at the gate. It begins there." The crowd erupted again, a thunderous wave of applause and shouts. Naomi stepped forward, surrounded by marshals but walking freely, each stride a statement of resilience. The storm had followed her to the ground, but Naomi knew storms could clear skies. The terminal quieted only after Naomi Carter was escorted through a side passage, away from the roar of reporters and the blinding flashes of cameras. The crowd still thundered behind her, but in this hallway, only the muffled echoes remained. She walked with measured steps, flanked by federal marshals. Her blazer was immaculate, her hair still in place. But inside, Naomi felt the exhaustion of carrying more than her own weight. She carried the hopes of strangers who had seen themselves in her story. The marshals led her into a private conference room in the airport. Waiting inside were officials from the FAA, representatives from Atlas Airlines, and a few stern-faced lawyers. The air smelled faintly of coffee and paperwork, heavy with the seriousness of what was about to unfold. At the head of the table sat Patricia Morrison, Deputy Administrator of the FAA. Her posture was crisp, her eyes sharp. "Ms. Carter," she said, standing briefly to shake Naomi's hand. "Thank you for your composure today. What happened on that flight will have far-reaching consequences for the airline, for the industry." Naomi nodded. "For the passengers, too. They should never be an afterthought." Patricia studied her closely. "Do you intend to press charges against Heather Collins?" The question landed like a stone. Naomi's chest tightened. The image of the slap replayed in her mind the sting, the humiliation. Part of her wanted justice, swift and personal. But another part of her, the part that had always chosen the long view, hesitated. Robert Hayes' voice echoed in her memory. "Don't let her silence you." Emily Watson's quiet conviction, "You're protecting all of us." Jordan Lee's livestream chat, "This is bigger than you." Naomi inhaled slowly. "I will not make that decision tonight. Justice is not just about punishment. It's about what we build after. I want to see what Atlas does first. If they honor their word, then maybe the greater justice will come from change, not retribution." Patricia's eyes softened, but her tone stayed firm. "That's a rare kind of patience. But I must remind you, Ms. Carter, the law will pursue its own path, regardless." Naomi nodded. "I understand." On the other side of the table, David Reynolds, the interim COO of Atlas Airlines, shifted nervously in his chair. His tie was loose, his face pale from sleepless hours. "Ms. Carter, Atlas has already begun drafting a public statement, but we'd like to ask you—" He hesitated, searching for words. "We'd like to ask you to stand with us when we announce reforms. Show unity. Help us restore trust." Naomi's eyes sharpened. "You don't want unity. You want cover. There's a difference." The room fell silent. Reynolds swallowed hard. "Then what do you want from us?" Naomi leaned forward, her voice steady. "Transparency, accountability, real timelines, not vague promises. And you'll put it in writing before this week ends." Reynolds opened his mouth, but before he could answer, the door creaked open. Captain Thomas Grant stepped inside, his uniform still neat, though his eyes looked older than they had hours ago. He met Naomi's gaze with quiet respect. "Ms. Carter," he said softly, "I don't know if you'll believe this, but I'm ashamed of what happened under my command. I should have stepped in sooner. I should have protected you." Naomi studied him, sensing the sincerity in his tone. "Captain, shame only matters if it leads to action. What will you do differently tomorrow?" The captain straightened. "I'll start by standing beside you when Atlas makes their announcement. Not as a captain, as a witness, because I saw the truth, and I won't bury it." The words carried weight. For the first time that day, Naomi felt a flicker of relief. Not triumph relief, because truth needed allies, even in uniforms. Hours later, after signatures were gathered and statements prepared, Naomi finally stepped outside into the cool Washington night. The crowd had thinned, but dozens still waited, holding signs, some chanting her name. Emily Watson appeared at her side, clutching her worn notebook. "I didn't want to leave without saying goodbye," she said. "I'll send this to your office, every detail, just in case the world tries to forget." Naomi placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "Don't underestimate the power of one person writing the truth." Robert Hayes approached next, his stride steady, his eyes tired but proud. "Ma'am, I don't hand out compliments lightly, but you fought with more discipline than most soldiers I knew. You made us proud today." Naomi smiled faintly. "Thank you, Robert. Coming from you, that means more than you know." Finally. Jordan Lee emerged from the crowd, his phone still buzzing in his hand. His eyes were wide with disbelief. 500,000 people watched live, and it's not stopping. Hashtags, news stations, even the White House tweeted about it. "Naomi, you just started something bigger than all of us." Naomi placed a hand over his. "Then use it well. Jordan, don't let it fade into entertainment. Make it matter." He nodded, overwhelmed but determined. As the marshals prepared to escort her to her car, Naomi paused. She looked back at the terminal, at the people still chanting, at the city lights beyond. She whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else, "Do I press forward as a leader or as a fighter, or can I be both?" The question lingered, but deep down, Naomi knew tomorrow she would have to choose. Morning light spilled over Washington, soft and golden. As Naomi Carter sat by the hotel window with a cup of black coffee in her hands, she had barely slept. The events of the past 24 hours replayed like a film reel she couldn't pause. The sting of Heather Collins' slap, the hush that fell over the cabin, the flood of witnesses who stood up, one by one, and then the avalanche of consequences that followed. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, alive with messages from board members, journalists, government officials. She ignored most of them. Instead, she tapped open the livestream replay from Jordan Lee for nearly 2 hours. The video captured every angle of her ordeal, the insult, the assault, the silence that gave way to voices, The moment truth turned into revelation. Comments scrolled across the screen. That was me last year at a different airline. Thank you for standing tall for all of us. I cried watching this. Finally, someone fought back and won. Naomi set the phone down, her chest tight. She wasn't proud of the slap, of the humiliation, but she was proud of what people had done with it. They had transformed it into a mirror of a much bigger issue. Later that day, Naomi walked into a press hall filled with hundreds of reporters and flashing lights. At the podium stood Thomas Grant Sr., CEO of Atlas Airlines. His normally polished demeanor carried an edge of humility. Yesterday, he began, voice firm but heavy. Atlas Airlines failed in the most basic duty we owe our passengers, dignity and safety. Ms. Naomi Carter was subjected to unacceptable treatment that revealed flaws in our training, our oversight, and our values. Today, I stand before you to say we are changing not in words, but in action. He paused, then gestured toward Naomi. She stepped forward, calm and resolute, as cameras clicked furiously. Naomi spoke into the microphones, her voice low but resonant. This incident was not about one woman and one crew member. It was about the millions of travelers who have faced bias, indignity, and silence. Yesterday, Atlas Airlines promised to change, but promises are fragile. What matters is accountability. Together, we are creating systems that will ensure no passenger is ever left unprotected again. Behind her, large screens displayed the new initiatives: a bias reporting hotline, mandatory anti-discrimination training, executive oversight of all passenger complaints, and quarterly public reports. The room erupted in questions, but Naomi's voice cut through. Change does not come from corporations alone. It comes from passengers, from witnesses, from ordinary people who refuse to stay silent. Yesterday, 3 passengers, Robert Hayes, Emily Watson, and Jordan Lee, chose courage. Their actions remind us that progress begins when we decide to act. At that, Robert, Emily, and Jordan were invited to the stage. The applause swelled. Robert's proud stance, Emily's notebook clutched like scripture, Jordan's phone raised high together. They symbolized something far larger than themselves. After the press conference, Naomi found a quiet corner backstage. She leaned against the wall, finally letting herself exhale. Emily approached, her eyes shining. That was more than a statement. Naomi, that was a turning point. Naomi smiled gently. Turning points only matter if the path after them is steady. Robert joined, his deep voice steady. You made sure it will be. Folks will remember this day. Jordan, still overwhelmed, whispered, people are calling it the Carter Standard. Naomi chuckled softly, shaking her head. No, Jordan, call it the People's Standard. It belongs to everyone who refuses to be silent. That evening, Naomi returned to Houston for the Skybridge Innovations Board meeting. The agenda had shifted dramatically. Instead of quarterly projections, they now faced questions of legacy. As she entered the room, the board chair stood. Naomi, the world knows your name now. Investors are flooding in. But beyond business, what do you want this company to stand for? Naomi looked around the polished table, her gaze steady. Skybridge has always built technology to connect people across the skies. Now, we will also build trust. We will support the Dignity in Transit Foundation, launching immediately with a $50 million endowment. Our mission won't stop at aircraft. It will reach trains, buses, every corner of travel where dignity has been denied. Silence followed, then nods, then applause. It was not just about profit anymore. It was about purpose. Weeks passed. The story rippled across the nation. Atlas Airlines rolled out reforms faster than anyone expected. Other carriers followed. The FAA introduced new anti-discrimination guidelines, citing Naomi's case as precedent. The White House invited her to join a federal task force shaping transportation equity policies. But what touched Naomi most were the letters. Handwritten notes from ordinary passengers, a mother who no longer feared flying with her mixed-race children, a veteran who said he felt seen for the first time, a teenager who decided to study law after watching the live stream. One evening, Naomi received a message from Heather Collins. It was unexpected, almost jarring. Heather had lost her job, faced public shame, and disappeared from view. The message was short. I was wrong. I let my prejudice blind me. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm trying to change. Naomi sat with it for a long time. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes and thought about the weight of hate, the slow work of transformation. Maybe one day she'd answer. Maybe the silence itself was the lesson Heather needed. Months later, Naomi stood on a stage at Morehouse College. Behind her, a banner read, "The Aviation Civil Rights Institute, Inaugural Ceremony," funded by Skybridge and supported by civil rights organizations. The institute would train the next generation of advocates, researchers, and leaders. Naomi's speech was simple, heartfelt. We cannot erase bias from hearts overnight, but we can build systems that protect dignity, even when bias tries to rise again. This institute is not about one flight or one CEO. It is about preparing countless young leaders to ensure justice soars higher than prejudice. As she spoke, she spotted familiar faces in the audience. Robert in the front row, chest out with pride. Emily scribbling in yet another notebook. Jordan live streaming as always. When the applause rose, Naomi felt something she hadn't felt since before the slap. Peace. The horizon stretched wide before her, not just of business deals or board meetings, but of justice, healing, and possibility. The wound of yesterday had become the seed of tomorrow, and she knew, with unshakable certainty, that the skies would never be the same. Life has a way of testing us in the most unexpected places. Naomi Carter's story reminds us that injustice often appears when we least expect it, on an airplane, in a classroom, or even at a grocery store. But her response teaches something deeper. Dignity is not about shouting louder. It's about standing firmer. For older generations who have witnessed decades of change, this story is a reflection of how far we've come and how far we still need to go. Prejudice may look different today, but the pain feels the same. Yet there is hope, because courage is contagious. When one person chooses grace over anger, truth over silence, it gives strength to all of us. The lesson is simple, but profound. We may not control how others treat us, but we always control how we respond. And in that response lies the power to inspire change, protect dignity, and build a world worth leaving to the next generation. Thank you for watching and sharing this journey with us. Your time, your voices, and your hearts make these stories matter. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can shine a light on dignity, justice, and the power of standing tall in the face of injustice.